My name is Edmund. I'm the CEO and founder of Equator. We're a software and data platform that provides data to destinations and travel companies to help their tourists make more sustainable decisions. And my colleague up here is the brilliant Milena Nikolova. She's the CEO and founder or co-founder of Behavior Smart. Honestly, you do a lot better job of describing your company, but essentially she creates the behavioral messages, ecosystems, and systems that encourage travelers to act more sustainably and to build sustainability by design. So, here's an extremely flattering photo of both of us when I had hair. That was about a month before I had a child. That's okay. So the topic of this conversation is how to make sustainability non-negotiable. And as is often the case when you begin to discuss topics before summits and talks, you have this like panic attack and realize, oh God, what if everybody already knows things about sustainability? What if I'm going to talk to a large group of people, or we're going to talk to tourists, and they already understand it, and our jobs become essentially meaningless? Our companies collapse inward, and there's no need for me anymore. So, to counter this fear, I built a little game with my team called Cards for Sustainability. It's not affiliated with Cards Against Humanity. In fact, it may indeed be the opposite. And I thought we could play this game together. After lunch, get active, get involved. It's very easy. It's 5 questions. And all you have to do is get 5 questions correct, and I will deem you a sustainability expert. Okay. And by the way, I will add, we asked a couple hundred tourists these questions too. So we went to different tourist markets and did focus groups. Some of my team actually just met in pubs for whatever reason and insisted they had to be in a pub for the quiz. So we just had 5 questions, and we're going to go through them. We'll see how we do. So what's the more carbon-friendly way for a couple to get across Australia? If you think it's flying, please raise your hand. 1, 2, a couple. Oh, it's growing. What about driving? Flying has it. Correct. Well done. Flying is more sustainable for getting across Australia. Driving would produce 3 times the emissions. Even actually driving a hybrid car, and potentially, we're close, even in an electric car, because the amount of hotel stays you have to take and the way the grid system works in Australia means you have to charge your car using a grid that is powered by coal. So, not great. Okay, next question. In the US, which mode of transport produces more carbon dioxide equivalent per passenger? Train, put your hand up. Bus, put your hand up. Okay, unfortunately, it's trains. That is because trains run on diesel, and unlike buses, are rarely full. Americans don't love trains, they don't take trains, and their infrastructure was not set up to move people, it was to ship goods. So it's not a system designed for moving people around. If I ask this question in Switzerland or in Japan, the answer is very different. Not even close. Okay, guys, we're halfway through. We're one question correct out of 2, right? You're already doing better than the morning group, so well done. True or false? A company with a platinum Earth Check certificate is more sustainable than one with bronze. If you think it's true, put your hand up. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By the way, if any of you are not voting, I will watch, right? I am from Australia. You are required to vote. So I will hunt you down. So false, put your hand up if you think it's false. We've got a smarter bunch. False, it's correct. A certificate is based on the length of time you've been reporting, not on your performance. So you get a platinum certificate, I think, for around 10 years of reporting with EarthCheck. Gold is at 5 years, silver is, I think, at 3, and bronze is maybe 1. I might have that slightly wrong, but yeah, it's not performance-based. It's based on how long you are reporting your impacts. Okay. EarthCheck is one of the world's largest sustainability certifying bodies. So they're one of the big ones. True or false? Hotels in water-scarce countries consume less water than hotels in water-rich countries. True? Put your hands up. Okay, or false? Okay, the answer is false. I'm going to say that I think they got that wrong. I think more people thought true than false. So I think we're 2 for 4 now, right? So false. Hotels in water-scarce countries consume significantly more. 3 to 4 times more. So like if you're in Canada, your water consumption, which is not a problem, Canada has loads of water. Hotels are very good at water conservation, whereas hotels in Dubai are not. Okay, last question. This is for the money. It's because the last group got 2 out of 5. You are on 2 out of 5. So if you get this right, you have bragging rights amongst everyone else that attended the last session. So which nationality of traveler is more concerned about sustainability? If you think it's the Danes, put your hand up. Okay. If you think it's Indian travelers, put your hand up. Gotcha. It's Indians. Yeah. So almost 99% of Indian travelers are more concerned about sustainability than the Danes. This just came out from Booking.com survey. Danes ranked last in their study. So a country, synonymous with sustainability. I didn't see Booking.com elaborate into this yet. They may have done elsewhere. But the hypothesis I have on this would be that because the Danes are so sustainable at home, when they travel abroad, they start to think, well, I do my bit. And I don't expect other countries to have the systems that we have at home. So there may be some inverted logic here. So what did I take away from this? Well, as my team reported back, we found that the average tourist got 1 out of 5 correct, which is not great. And interestingly, we did some conversations with experts in sustainable travel, and they got 3 out of 5. The Danes and the Indians one tripped everybody up. It's a tricky one. And I had 3 realizations about this. The first is that I had a job. My team were needed. Data is still important. There's still some work to do. So that was good. I could go home and sleep knowing that hopefully that we had some work to do the next day. The second thing that is sustainability is incredibly complicated. And expecting tourists to understand dynamics is probably more than we can ask. There's just too much information for them to consume when all they're really thinking about is beaches, holidays, hikes, enjoying their experience and then bragging about it on Instagram. And the third is that the tourist is less intelligent than a chimpanzee. And that is because if you, in 5 50 questions, a chimpanzee would have an expected mean of 2.5 out of correct. And the average expert is only marginally more intelligent than the chimpanzee. And this brings us to a almost larger problem, which is the assumptions we have about what we understand about sustainability as tourists, as people, can work against us. We use bias, we use information we've learned about flying being bad, and we apply it to all forms of flying. We apply it universally as just a global truth. We had someone from Greenland in earlier, and they were talking about in Greenland it is less sustainable to eat vegetables than meat. So you need to eat and consume meat and fish in Greenland, not vegetables. So that runs contrary to almost everything you're told in the global media. And so this brings me to the kind of fundamental problem we're going to tackle today, which is expecting tourists to make informed decisions is incredibly hard. In fact, it's almost impossible if you give them a choice to expect them to make the right choice every time. And I think this is really important because it summarizes one of the statistics many of you will have seen. This is from, again, Booking.com, but you'll see this from Ctrip, Expedia, KPMG. There are a huge number of studies now in what tourists and what consumers want. This doesn't just apply to travel. It can apply to fashion, cosmetics, several industries now. Is that the majority are now actively looking for and seeking sustainable products. The reality is that less than 2% buy them. There's an enormous gap between what consumers want and what they're willing to pay for and what they actually purchase. And this will be, I hope, one of fixing this gap will be the way we manage sustainability. If we can make sustainability accessible, easy, and critically desirable, managing this gap will be how we do it. So that is going to be the driving force behind decisions. So I'm now going to pass this over to Milena, who is far more qualified to explain the science behind why this gap exists. So over to you.
Thank you. So, thanks to the way that societies have been developing, the way that the COVID crisis focused attention on sustainability, and of course, the plenty of efforts that have been going on, including in our industry, we see an increased awareness among societies, but also among travelers, that sustainability is something that needs to be tackled and something that impacts everybody. So we see that number that relates to being aware, being sensitive to sustainability, and actually also being anxious about the fact that there's another crisis lurking, grow up, but not the number of actually engaging in action. What we're seeing here is what we refer to in human behavior as to the intention-action gap. And what the intention-action gap means is the gap between the stated intention or desire to do something or to support a certain action and the statement that you commit or that your value system actually is in line with this action, but actually never engaging in the action itself. So why does the intention-action gap exist? Edmund here demonstrated that sustainability is complex. And not only is it complex, it's complex for experts, let alone for travelers, but it actually varies. So what might be sustainable in one place and what you may have learned during your holiday in Italy would absolutely not hold if you're coming to Japan or if you're going to Greenland. So that means that it's exceptionally unrealistic to expect that travelers will ever be educated to the extent that they will manage that level of sophistication properly. And second, the way that we actually approach the packaging and presentation of sustainability options contradicts the way that traveler psychology works and the way that we make decisions when we think about, when we plan, and when we consume our holidays. So this is where behavioral science comes in and offers some helpful insights. And we've tried to package a little bit of theory just to give you the context and explanation without going too technical. So hopefully you'll find this successful. But here's what we need to know. If we are to really start tackling the intention-action gap, we need to understand why is it that people care about or are sensitive to sustainability, but they don't act on it? And why the way that we present currently sustainability actually doesn't work? Why education doesn't work? Why the fact that people understand that there's a crisis doesn't get them to act? And the reason is that it doesn't align with the thinking patterns that travelers use when they plan their holiday, when they think about their holiday. When we are planning our next vacation, there's two types of decisions that shape what we end up doing. One group of the decisions relates to the experience, the fun, the excitement, the memories we're going to be creating, the super cool stories that we're going to be telling our friends. So these are the types of decisions that relate to which destination we're going to choose, what activities we're going to engage in, how can we get more experience, how can we connect more with what's truly authentic, what foods to try. These are decisions that are driven by our heart, by our emotions. So this group is the types of decisions that actually relate to maximizing the experience. Now, along with them, we also take a lot of other operational decisions, which where we address potential functional and operational issues. So, how are we going to arrive? What's the fastest way of getting from the airport downtown? What location should we look at for hotels? How to make sure that the budget doesn't go overboard and things like that. So these are practical decisions that we usually make with our mind that seek to minimize the chance for a problem. Now, these two types of decisions are very different in terms of the parts of the brain, if you will, and the mechanics that fuel them. So when we think about how sustainability should be part of these decisions, we should understand that we need to align it with two different decision-making systems. when we look at experiential decision making, we need to make sustainability appealing. When people make decisions about experiences, about the choices that they need to be making so that they can make their neighbors more envious, then we need to present sustainability options in a way that adds that extra value, in a way that makes it impossible for them to resist choosing that, in a way that adds excitement and feels rewarding. Now, when we talk about decisions that are there to avoid problems, or to make the trip seamless, location, function, ease, that's where sustainability needs to be effortless. It needs to be super easy for them to choose. So this is where we try to make it default so that they don't even think about it. They choose it because it's the easiest option. We try to eliminate any effort or hassle in the choice. And in many places, we just take out the choice and we incorporate it in the design of the experience. Now, this is all the theory I'm going to give you. I want to use several examples and actually relate to Lisa's presentation and show you how within the framework that they developed as a destination to move towards net zero, we actually supported with behavioral science the shift that the destination ecosystem needs to make in order to change behavior on a destination level. So we're going to look at how we use behavioral design, following the principles that I just made, using, applying human realism in terms of how people make decisions and act on experiences and operational aspects, and how that helps make travel in Finland low carbon. Here. So one thing that we looked at is if we want to shift the tourism economy and make it lower carbon, one thing that definitely helps is if you get travelers to walk more rather than use transportation, obviously within destinations where that's possible and where there's infrastructure for that. So this is where we, for example, used the power of default options, and we started working with the whole area of stakeholders from destinations to different tourism operators to make walking directions always the default option. So always when you open the page of a restaurant and you want to know how to get there, the first thing that you see is walking. When you open the information page of a local DMO to find out how to get around or what is there to see, the first thing that you see is how to walk from one place to another. So this is one of the examples of how we adopted this. Another thing that, of course, you want to do is if you have public transportation, especially if it's actually the low carbon one, which Finland has, you want more travelers to be using that rather than jumping in taxis or renting cars. So that's where we worked with the ecosystem of companies to find ways to make public transportation very easy to choose, hassle-free. So for example, we would work with tour operators to incorporate information about buying a ticket and actually the link to buy a ticket into the itinerary right there. So that as you're looking through what's planned for you for the day, you can immediately click and buy a ticket where necessary, or you can get a link to the walking route where that is possible. So another example of what we did within the operational decision-making domain is to eliminate the choice and actually make the desired choice part of the design. So this is where we worked with companies to incorporate smart mobility choices into the design of the experience. So you see here an example from our toolset where we help companies incorporate the public transportation or the walking experience into the experience. So here the example is that we present the travel with public transportation as part of the activity. The city from a tram window, we get people to actually watch for specific sites along the way, and we don't even, that doesn't even leave them with the option to consider alternative transportation because they perceive this as part of the entire experience. So you can see how with such adjustments and targeted interventions at different choice points, we address decision-making, which relates to operational, functional choices, and we plug in sustainability in a way that aligns with how the decision-making system works in that context. Now, let's look at experiences. For example, when you want your destination to move towards lower carbon operations, one of the things that you definitely want is to increase demand for low footprint experiences. So we worked with operators and with DMOs to help them. This thing stopped working. Here. To help them start communicating and presenting low footprint experiences in ways that makes them really resistible. So people want to go to lakes and swim in lakes and jump in lakes, not because it's a low footprint experience, but actually because it sounds super, super exciting. And the way that it's presented makes you want to do it regardless of what's the sustainability profile of that option. We also trained many to begin adding excitement to sustainable options. So for example, we worked with restaurants and helped them increase demand for local seasonal meals by adding time limitation and scarcity. So you see here, now you can only have this only within these months and while it's available during the season. So that perception for scarcity and time limitation increases the likelihood, increases the excitement and respectively the likelihood that this option will be selected. And then we also use rewards. We want to reward people for choosing sustainability without even discussing it. We want them to choose it because they feel that they're getting something extra. Because remember, they're in the decision mode when they're looking for excitement, for bragging opportunities. So we do things like helping describe experiences which are low footprint and which steer people away from crowded places by highlighting specific rewards. So in this case, you will see some of the most exciting treasures that most travelers don't see. So you're getting something extra. You will be rewarded with this. And you will also be rewarded with the fact that you'll see the real cultural heritage treasure of our town that locals actually perceive as local treasure. So you see that with simple adjustments of the way that you present sustainable options, we are riding on that excitement wave and are aligning sustainability options with these principles. So what I know I gave you just a few examples, but they really illustrated the type of interventions that can help adjust the entire ecosystem by looking at the destination in its entirety and finding the choice points that travelers make along their entire travel and addressing the decision-making mechanism respectfully and based on which decision-making system is driving it. And when you do that, you're doing something very important, and that's adjusting the entire ecosystem in a way that facilitates, enables, and makes sustainable behavior easier, and that changes the norm or the way that travelers travel within the destination. So here I'll pass on to Edmund to talk about measuring.
Milena, thank you so much. That was amazing. Brilliant. I'm going to clap. All right, so I'm going to now talk about how do you measure behavioral change? How do you talk about data and impact calculations? Normally, this is extraordinarily boring. When you get data scientists and sort of academia and people that work in data together, it gets pretty detailed. And so what I really want to focus on here is how do we just make it simple, make it straightforward and easy as you possibly can, Because ultimately, if we're going to do what Milena asks us to do to affect, meaningful behavioral change, you have to make it simple, compelling, easy. And what applies for what Milena says in behavioral change and design of trips and sustainable operations applies for data as well. It's the same things. Tourists don't want to interact with, huge complex data sets. They don't want to learn about things if it makes things sort of difficult for them to experience. They want it to be part of their trip, and it should be. So how do we do that? So the first thing I'm going to talk about is defining success. And what I mean by that is that when you start to measure something, it's critically important at the beginning is why you're measuring it for you. Don't measure something because everyone else does. Don't measure it because someone else is doing that. Start to define the goal of that single measurement you're going to invest in, because it is going to cost you some money. It may not, in terms of time, it may cost you a few days, it could be weeks, it could be months. If you're a larger company, you might be hiring Deloitte or McKinsey, or the best company everyone's talking about, which is Equator, mine. And so defining success is going to be a really, really important part of that process. Because it's going to allow you to avoid waste and getting bogged down in things that the consultancy or the firm is going to tell you need to do. This is really important, and don't copy paste. So just because someone else measures something, it doesn't mean you should either. If you have a metric that works in economic development or in calculating the economic impact on a community in Botswana, that doesn't mean it's going to work in Greenland. Because you've used surveys or seen survey work in Panama, it doesn't mean it's going to make sense in Australia either. All of these things need to have local kind of nuances and understandings to them. So I really want to emphasize is that in the same time as you're defining success and thinking about your measures, do it from scratch. Start from the very beginning for why you're doing it. So even if you're a small operator to a TUI or a cruise liner, whether you're a small destination all the way up to like Paris or London, it's really important that you begin with what matters to your communities, your local systems, because they need their own dynamics, right? They need to be respective of the culture, the community, the environment, flora and fauna that exist for you. This one is a particular problem that I encounter. Is a lot of people tell me that I can't afford to measure things. I'm not big enough. I can't invest millions of dollars in big firms. You don't need to. You really don't. Oftentimes, when you know what you need to measure, you can find information online for free about it. You can get enough of an insight to affect a behavioral change. And it may just be that, there's some study that's been published in some remote wilderness out in the academic world that Google or ChatGPT or Bing are able to find within seconds for you. So I always recommend customers, before you think about measurement, have you tried looking for some answers or some indications, and then test it. See if it matters. If you're trying to determine if a behavioral change is working or not, it's a binary answer. It's either yes or no. If that's the only determination you need to make, then you don't need to survey people. You don't need to build really complex systems around it. Sometimes the answer can be very straightforward and right in front of you. So start small. In the same vein of starting small, I also think it's critically important whenever you're communicating data is to tell a story. The purpose of data was not to be used in Excel. It wasn't to kind of overwhelm people or make it too complicated. It really is just about storytelling. So you imagine sitting around a fire and telling someone about a piece of information. My team have a test we do. It's called the grandma test. And what it does is, if you imagine you told this story or information to your grandma, would they be able to repeat it to her friends? Okay? If you told your 12 or 13-year-old child, would they be able to roughly understand what it is you're talking about? And if you fail that test, if it's difficult to repeat, if it's difficult to capture and immediately understand, the chances are there's something wrong with the storytelling aspect of your data. And this is why carbon calculations are not good for convincing tourists to make sustainable choices. Because tourists can't relate to them. It's really difficult for them to figure out what 37.6 kilograms of CO2 is. Or, there's several sustainability companies that produce index scores, 7.3 out of 10. The tourist has to go, I don't know, is that good or bad? I have no idea. I have no reference. I'm going to go back to booking.com and see what they think about it. Oh, reviews. I love reviews. I'm going to go with what I know. So by making something inaccessible, by overcomplicating it, by forcing them to educate themselves, you're kind of making it a bit of a hassle. And it comes back to what Milena's saying, like the operational side of it suddenly becomes the problem. And now they're like, yeah, I really like the photos on this hotel. Let's just go here. So how do you do it differently? Well, I'm going to caveat this by saying, so these are insights that my company's data engine produces automatically. We have thousands and thousands of data sets embedded, and we have generation systems that produce insights that are simple and straightforward. And what we've done is we've mocked them up to demonstrate how single data points or small pieces and packets of information can have very powerful marketing purposes or can tell a very compelling story quickly. So in this case, we would say, if you hate crowds, then travel to Porto in December and you see 79% fewer tourists. That was generated in seconds. That didn't take weeks and months of study. There's a very, very fast calculation to build because, we're able to essentially model when low demand and high demand can kick in. And you can deploy that for any destination that's suffering from over-tourism. And fascinatingly, most tourists hate other tourists. We just generally don't like other people like us being in the place that we think we've discovered. So it's a natural kind of winning tool. You're kind of creating that sense of scarcity. You're creating that sort of demand for something by making it compelling and making it something that they can relate to. This was a this was a calculation we did last year for my last summit at ATTA. We were talking about why the Mona Lisa has become the world's most disappointing attraction. And the reason is primarily time and space. It's that it's so popular that the average group of 120 people get just 120 seconds to look at the picture, and then you're screamed at to move on. And there are thousands of photos of the Mona Lisa, just hordes of people in front of her, and you can't see her. The picture's too small, and there's nothing the Louvre can do about this. So if you're trying to take advantage of that, and Norway did this recently, they said, Paris is really busy, come here. Save France by visiting Norway. I don't know how the French felt about that, but this is another example where you can take an attraction, you can take an iconic entity that people can recognize and affiliate with, and create a scenario where 120 seconds among crowds is not a huge amount of time. Let's just go to Van Gogh instead. Let's go to Musée d'Orsay. Let's go somewhere else where it might be quieter and my experience might be better. You don't need to use the Mona Lisa. You don't need to use Van Gogh. You can deploy this for any type of product, whether you're an operator or a big destination. And lastly, and I really want to be clear on this, Visit Bhutan did not commission this in any way. This is just a mock-up. So they're not affiliated with this. But we built this purely to demonstrate how you can take incredibly complex calculations like carbon negative at the national level and turn those into marketing slogans that may be compelling to people that are concerned about carbon. So this one is there are 3 carbon negative countries in the world. We're one of them. Visit Bhutan. This might only appeal to people who are very climate conscious, who are very carbon focused, but it works. It's quick, it's easy, and it's a single number. I'm not using 30, 40 examples. I'm not forcing 13 calculations down your throat, and I'm not, showing you all the certifications that Bhutan rightly has. It matters to them. For the tourist, you're giving them a compelling reason for going to Bhutan. One of many. It's an extraordinary country. By the way, if you want to know the other 2 countries, you'll have to sign up for my platform. Right. Okay, so I kind of like summarizing here a little bit, but to come back to the beginning, so what are the ideal sustainable travel behaviors for a destination? And this is a job of destinations. It's a job of communities and of companies to work together to figure out what are you trying to achieve. And this is like defining success for your sustainability. The second then is how do you build the ecosystem to make it easy and appealing? And those are the 6 bullet points that Milena beautifully summarized around making it easy for the operational side, making it default by design, and then make it exciting and compelling and interesting. And then what are you measuring? And how are you building measures to reinforce that experience? So when you think about measurement, you're saying, okay, I'm going to build a measure, and this measure is going to help drive this outcome. So we're going to reuse it for something else. So this is sort of the end of the presentation part of this, but because I am a benevolent speaker, kind and gracious, I have decided, or we have decided, I am a dictator, but anyway, the example here where we have 4 topics. So we can do 2 things. We can do a Q&A, you can have questions, make it more workshopy. Alternatively, if you don't want to put up your hand, you don't want any questions, or there are none, we'll continue talking whether you like it or not. So we got 4 topics here. We have other industries are being sustainable by. This is a demonstration of what like the fashion industry is doing. We've also got the change I want to make happen is. So this is a behavioral thing. Milena is very much going to focus on this. There aren't slides for this, but it's purely if you want to manage over-tourism or if you want to encourage your tourists to pick your products that are sustainable, how do you do it? Meaningful data does this. These are lessons my company have internally for like how do we write our data stories? What are the guides, the rules that we have for the data science team and the software developers when we're building insights into the dynamics of tourism? And lastly, slides that didn't make it into this deck. This was stuff that one of us or both of us wanted to talk about, but it just didn't make any sense at all for this presentation, but we thought we'd throw it in there. So, over to our microphone distributors, and for the audience, if you have any questions, or if you want to just say, I want to hear about this, let me know. Slides that didn't make it this day. It's crazy. We talked about putting this in, and both groups were like, that's the first thing we want to see. See, that was behavioral nudges like that. But yes, was that a question? Or just before you start, there's a microphone on its way, and wonderful.
There are little leaves of sustainability and so on in there. Thank you. But I have seen and done a bit of digging on the data behind that and how sustainable are those hotels in reality. And a lot of them use 25 times the amount of water on a per room basis that the local people in that community do and so on. How do we define sustainability? And I feel there is a huge amount of greenwashing out there. Mm-hmm. And I think and I'm not a tour operator, but I facilitate a lot of things for tour operators. And I feel that it is a minefield to navigate because customers are constantly being bombarded with non-truthful information as well. And I don't know, but I would think that that's why I think it needs to be made easy. And I agree very much with what you said, because there is no point saying this hotel is sustainable to a customer. They may look on booking.com and say, but booking.com tells me this one is sustainable as well, so I can just do whatever I like. And I find it's quite a difficult place to navigate. I'm not sure it's necessarily a question per se, but what recommendation would you give in that scenario? And is there any regulation that will come in place so people can't go about talking greenwashing in the way that we do nowadays? I don't know.
Yeah, this is a minefield topic, and it's difficult to even begin to answer this, but I'll give it a go. About a year ago, Gustavo from the ATTA sent me a link, and he said, is this possibly true? And the link was, I think, Destination Mallorca. And it was a large hotel chain had said the carbon calculations of hiking in Peru are 23 times higher than visiting our resort. Travel sustainably, go to resorts. And he was appalled. He's like, this is awful. And this cannot be right. It was right. It's a correct calculation. The way they had constructed the data made it compelling. It made it from a scientific or from a data point of view. Yeah, I can't really fault the calculation they weren't fudging the numbers. I wouldn't even say they were exaggerating too much, but they were adding things in that I think an adventure operator in Peru would probably not say is their responsibility. So you will see an emergence genuinely, and I think it's an unavoidable emergence of a marketing war around sustainability. And until there is local regulation, and I emphasize local, destination level systems to designate what is sustainable and what is certified and what is audited, it's the Wild West, right? Anyone can get away with anything. And I say this a lot in other talks I do. The most sustainably certified companies, most of the time, happen to be the most unsustainable. The oil and gas companies have tons of certification, tons and tons and tons. They have huge quantities of data. Cruise liners have loads. Airlines have massive amounts of certification and sustainability data. So it's very, very difficult for smaller operators, for smaller destinations to compete with that level of budget. And, they have multiple people in their sustainability teams. I did 4 months of consulting in oil and gas in Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And I quit after 4 months because the greenwashing wasn't just subtle, it was extraordinary. And they had in this one instance, they had an oil spill, and they wanted to report to the global standard that they had reduced the quantities of oil spills that year. And I said, okay, great, but how big was your single oil spill you had this year? He said, we're not disclosing that information. And I was like, well, it's not about the number of oil spills you have, it's about the amount of oil you lost in the single spill, or in all the spills. And they said, yeah, but that's the part that we don't want to share. They still got the certification. I mean, it still happened. But in terms of that kind of like greenwashing side of things, I think the best thing to do is just be armed with information, be armed with your own story, and explain to your customers when they're on site, when they're in communities, demonstrate it, prove it. Your retention rates will be high, your churn rates will be great, and I think your conversion will go up. Tourists are not stupid. They know very quickly when something doesn't look sustainable, and the more education they're given when they're traveling, the more it just becomes natural for them. And the best example I have for this is restaurants. Like when you go to a restaurant, you don't get given, HACCP certifications. They're not throwing all these things in your face. They just give you a menu, and you expect the place to be clean. You expect it to meet standards locally. That is what has to happen in sustainability. It is not going to be a case where tourists are going to be discerning enough to immediately recognize data when it's in front of them. So it's a long answer for your question, but it's a minefield problem.
There's so many companies that certify for environmental friendly or sustainable and stuff like that. So how useful are these certifications, and how much can they actually support your business without also like greenwashing?
Feel free to jump at any point.
I will start.
In the last talk we did, I kept passing the questions to Milena, and then someone was like, "Why do you always give her the difficult ones and give yourself?" So, how useful is sustainable certification? I think extremely useful, but I would caveat by saying for why you're doing it. Like define success for you. So why are you doing it? And I think for me, if it is to drive conversion, so if it's to increase your sales, increase revenue, increase retention rates, then it's useful so long as you're converting that certification and the data into something that matters to your customers. And that comes back to giving them that single sentence that they can share with their social media, friends, promote their networks. Reformation, the clothing brand, US clothing brand for women, is incredibly good at converting its certification into marketing. It's an art, and it's exquisite to watch them do it. They're very, very good. So good, in fact, that they mask some of their more negative impacts. But Reformation, yeah. Patagonia do this seamlessly. Their brand is almost identified as sustainable and then a clothing company. So there are great examples out there where you've transformed certification into something really powerful as a marketing tool. As for the greenwashing side, yeah. I mean, there are also certification entities that are very suspicious. And that's why I think leaning on ATTA and leaning on partners that have their own recommendations, their own systems, and are rigorous about who they recommend, I strongly, strongly recommend that. And again, coming back to destinations, they are the kings and queens of these decisions. They should be the ones in charge of saying, that's the certification we want. VAC in Iceland, they have their own brand of sustainability. Visit Finland, a colleague, Lisa, who was just here, has their own brand of sustainability. I think as we progress, nationwide or internationally, you'll start to see lots of local systems being certified, and it's the same way as food hygiene standards. I would presume that the prefecture and the governorate of Hokkaido will have its own food and hygiene standard that might be different from Tokyo, or it could be nationally mandated. But the point is, tourists don't learn about all the complexities, they just expect it to be managed.
That actually is a point that I want to build on, and that's that there's actually research that shows that certification systems do not change the behavior of consumers. They are, however, very helpful when it comes to guiding the actions of businesses. So if business wants to be sustainable, but they don't know where to start, they receive the guidelines from a certification system and then they follow the track. And so that's a huge benefit. So what we are seeing now predominantly in Europe, I don't know about other parts of the world, is governments begin to incentivize businesses to follow either the national, whatever local certification system they have, or a set of approved systems, to the extent that they're beginning to make marketing services or even funding or economic support conditional on the company being on a track with an approved sustainability certification system. So what we talked about, businesses creating or facilitating sustainable choices among travelers, basically goes on the next level, and governments are facilitating certification actions among businesses. So that's where it can make a big difference, because if your entire ecosystem is aligned, then that trickles to the travelers as well, because the system is set up in a way that operates sustainably.
Any more questions? Anyone want us to dive into? We had slides that didn't make it, right? I'm going to count that. Okay, right. We're going to jump into slides that didn't make it. You're going to regret this. No. Okay. All right, here we go. 43% of tourists consider themselves knowledgeable about sustainability. Now, I showed in the quiz earlier, a very unscientific approach to demonstrating the complexity. So treat this with a grain of salt. And then 2 months ago, some brilliant academic decided to ask a large group of men one very important question. They asked the men, in an emergency, do you think you could land a plane? 50% of men said yes. 50. Half the men on a plane, if the call came out, do any of you know how to land a plane? Half the men would put their hands up. Now, I don't think 50% of men on an Airbus A380, I'll put it this way, I don't want to be on that plane. And this comes to data. Well, you can see why Milena was like, don't put this in, Ed. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. This is why asking people what they think about their understanding of something, they overvalue their competency. They overvalue their ability to assess, to understand. And so, again, it comes back to like what Milena is really advocating. I would say like pioneering in behavioral economics in travel and tourism is like the only way we're going to successfully do this is by making it default, is by designing systems for customers and then rewarding them for their design. So, and I can talk about that in like best practices and in data storytelling, but like the reward system of encouraging good behavior, promoting it is critically important. Good for you for measuring something and for making that effort by default by design, but you're not getting the most out of it if you're not telling your customers how critically important it is. Something else I was going to talk about, which is what are we doing wrong right now? Someone mentioned Booking.com. I think you mentioned Booking.com earlier. So when you're point of view of a customer and you start thinking about sustainability, what often happens is you search for like sustainable travel, sustainable holiday, and invariably you meet this. Just text and text and text, and then icons that you somehow have to like memorize and then use again. We see this all the time, and it falls into this trap of thinking that tourists care, that they're going to spend all that energy and time researching, learning about a specific system, and then applying that to the product, when deep down, what they want to do is go on holiday. They want to break from accountability. They want to break from responsibility. Their lives are full of it. So if you say, hey, your job is intense, you've got screaming kids nearby, you've got financial pressure, how about you read 4.5 pages of sustainability data before you make your decision? You're going to go, no. And it falls into this trap of this. This is the output of what we produce in most sustainability day to day, is we advertise low flush toilets as being a justification for picking something. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen that low flush toilets matter, or LED light bulbs. They're important for sustainability, but that doesn't mean tourists need to know the information. So I would almost recommend removing it and giving them the story that really matters to them. Give them the reason to book, and most importantly, give them a reason. By the way, I don't like the fact people are taking photos while I'm stood next to this. I did not think about it. See, this is why it wasn't in the deck. Right. So yeah, give them a reason to book and make it compelling. Do you want to talk about your experiment?
Yep, sure. All right, so another set of slides that didn't make it. because we didn't know how to align it with everything else, was about an experiment that we ran, our team ran together with Travel by B Corp. Travel by B Corp is an organization of B Corp certified tourism companies in the UK. So they reached out to us and said, listen, we're really trying to tackle this intention action gap. We know that more and more people keep saying that they actually want to travel sustainably, yet we don't see that translate into real action. How do we communicate? What's the right messages? And that's when we sat together. I brought a much deeper slide deck that looked at science and studies and so on, showing that with communication alone, you're never going to close that gap, and that you actually have to weave sustainable choices in the design, accounting for which decision-making system is viable at the specific choice point. So all of these are top performing companies. They were super interested in seeing proof for that. So we decided to do a small experiment. We're now looking to repeat that at much larger scale with universities and so on. But here's what we did. We basically took several hour outdoors experience near Brighton. This image is not Brighton, but the experiment was actually in Brighton. And we did the following. We split them into 3 groups, and we wanted to see how the intention action gap would work out. And we focused on 4 different dimensions. One was plastics. Second was carbon footprint, local shopping or local economic impact, and engagement with nature. And all 3 groups were asked to tell us to what extent, on a scale of 1 to 10, they agree that we should take care not to bring any waste when we are in natural areas, to what extent they think that shopping locally is important, to what extent they think that it's important to watch your carbon footprint or to make choices which are with lower carbon footprint, and to what extent you should engage and interact with nature when you're in the outdoors. And all 3 groups scored the maximum 10 out of 10. Now, we then let them go on their experiences, and there were slight design adjustments in the 3 groups. The first group, we just told them, here's the beginning of the hike, here's the end of the hike. You have 10 pounds to spend to buy some lunch for your hike. You get to keep the change. And then we didn't do anything else. So they all jumped in their cars, drove to the starting point of the hike. On the way, they stopped at supermarket, just one of the large British chains. They bought a bunch of things with heavy packaging, as you can imagine, and embarked on their experience, followed the route that we gave them, and then they returned. The other 2 groups did something slightly different. First, they were told that the meeting point is at the bus stop, where the 2 groups would take the bus that would take them to the starting point. So we used public transportation for that. Again, they were given the same budget to spend on lunch, but we secured a local producer that sources everything locally. And that uses only sustainable packaging, so no plastics, everything recyclable, to deliver the lunch. We asked them to bring their water bottles and gave them specific spring points where they could refill their bottle with spring water. And the only difference between Group 2 and Group 3 was that in addition to all of that, Group 3 got some interpretation information about the hike and the nature and specific spots that was really, really interesting, and that made them pay attention and really connect with their surroundings. And what was super interesting was that the hike that we took was actually a very popular weekend hike that people would do with their family. So everybody already had been multiple times in that area, but that information was new for them, and it really gave them a very different experience. So what ended up happening is that even though everybody started up with the same intentions, we ended up seeing very different performance in terms of footprint. So our first group, which we didn't manipulate in any way, or we didn't design in a sustainable manner, they used a much higher carbon access option because they all drove individually to the starting spot. They all brought in plastics and all sorts of packaging because they shopped at the supermarket with plenty of that. And plastic bags and all of that. They ended up spending about half of the spend that the other two groups made with the local lunch. And they definitely didn't report any engagement or connectedness with nature. The difference between the second and the third group was very little in terms of performance on all of the sustainability dimensions, except that the group that had this additional information really used some additional extraordinary descriptions of the experience that showed that they actually really connected with their surroundings. They were really pleased and excited that they learned something new, and they appreciated more this space. And actually, they inspired everybody else to go back and do the hike again with the interpretation information in hand. So this is some initial an initial experiment that suggests that maybe in certain ways, when we weave in sustainability and do it in a behavior smart way, accounting for the different decision-making patterns, we can increase satisfaction and the quality of the experience and make more sustainable options also more successful on the market. So this is why I wanted to mention that, because it's actually a great demonstration of supply-driven sustainability.
And those are the slides that didn't make it. So imagine how good the slides that did make it must be. All right. Any other questions or topics, or anyone want to jump into any of the other domains? Meaningful data. Okay. Meaningful data looks like. All right. So these are a set of rules for sustainable data, and how to tell stories in data and how to communicate it properly. There are several amazing books about this, and what my team have done over the last 2 years of operations is synthesize the books into a guideline for data scientists and for the software developers at Equator. So we use time, not numbers. So by this I mean, here is a statement about McDonald's. McDonald's alone outspends the 5-a-day campaign by 351. If you don't know, the 5-a-day campaign is like an eat healthy campaign in the US. That's okay. A sentence kind of makes sense. But 350 to 1 is difficult to fathom, like that scale of difference. So instead, you turn it into a time-based statement. If an American child sees a McDonald's commercial every day, it would take them a year to see a commercial one about eating healthy. That's a lot easier to remember. It's a lot simpler to kind of like wrap your head around. And we can do this for tons of data. Like we have, I think, something like 37 to 43 individual guidelines. One of them is you're not allowed to use pie charts in my company. Pie charts are good for nothing other than making you think about pizza. So instead of talking about women comprise 2.1% of Fortune 500 CEOs, we say, among Fortune 500 companies, there are more men named James than there are women. Use basic multipliers. You know, don't get too complex with this. The moment you start to like wrap your head around bigger and bigger multipliers, you start to lose your audience. So instead of the 2020 Australian wildfires destroyed an estimated 46 million acres, 2 problems with this statement. 1, 46, it's a difficult number to remember. Well, actually 3 problems. 2, million is a very difficult concept to wrap your head around. A million is a difficult number to fathom. Whenever you ask somebody like on the street, imagine what $1 million looks like in like $1 notes, they'll be like, oh, it's tons. It's not. It's like a briefcase this big. It's incredibly depressing how like tightly packed you can get $1 million. I know that from a former job. And then the term acre. Acre is specific to a region. Like certain countries use acres, others don't. It's prohibitive. And an acre, again, is difficult to fathom. Any space dimension is difficult to wrap your head around. So you make it relatable to something that's instinctive, that most people should know, and that is an area twice the size of Portugal. Most people roughly know where Portugal is, and most people roughly know the size of it. And so it's easier to pick Portugal, particularly for European, than it would be to talk about 46 million acres. Obviously, if you live in, in certain countries, don't pick countries very far away. So don't say 3 times a year of Bhutan if you live in Nevada. Like, very, very difficult for people to understand that if they're not familiar with Bhutan. And lastly, make it relatable. Money is incredibly relatable to people. Everyone kind of has some attachment and affiliation with money. So instead of saying the US national debt is $27 trillion, and if you think million was difficult to wrap your head around, trillion is even harder. Instead you say that's like every American owing $82,000 each. So for the meaningful data thing, it's about converting your carbon calculation into something that matters. So rather than saying your output was 87 kilograms of CO2, you say your output was the equivalent of serving 2 T-bone steaks, right? So you're like, oh, two T-bone steaks is quite a lot. Or you change it again and say that your output is the equivalent to 4,363 hours of watching Netflix. That's, well, don't use 4,000, it's too big a number, but you get my point. That is my very quick tips on how to do meaningful data. We have loads of these at Equator, and we deploy them in very, very different ways. But the point is, like, it's how you get information to the consumer as quickly as you possibly can. And again, one of the rules we have is, can you fit it on Instagram? Can you read it? So if you post it and it's really long, yeah, I'd maybe struggle with that one. That might not be something that's worth posting. Okay. Yes, of course I can. The one, from a design point of view, that stands out is, I think it's Data is Beautiful by David McCandless. It's a very famous one. And there's another American female author whose name eludes me right now, but I will check and get back to you after this. I'll have to go on the Notion board. It's been a while since I read them. But Factfulness by Hans Rosling is my hero. Is a life-changing book. I recommend everybody read it. Factfulness. Factfulness. By Dr. Hans Rosling. He was the guy that created the chimpanzee quiz concept at the beginning of the summit. So it's his idea to do that. And he died very sadly a few years ago. But yeah, in terms of data and visualization of data, he's one of the founding fathers of modern visualization. Any questions? Or Matt?
In terms of carbon numbers, it's quite easy to get lost in terms of, this tour produces this much kilograms of carbon. How do you communicate in terms of obviously we're trying to hit a certain level for global warming. How do you simplify in terms of, what should we be using every day, or what, if a tour produces this much, is that good? Is that bad?
Yeah.
How do you, it's easy to get confused by the numbers, but what numbers would you communicate and how do you use that?
So what I would do there is I'd take these two issues apart and say, are you talking to customers? And are you selling? Are you looking at retention, or are you looking at reporting? If it's reporting, there should be standards set by the certifying body for how that data is formatted, reported on. Every local institute will have its own designation for that. If you're talking to customers selling, then you've got to make it appealing, and you've really got to demonstrate it's better than something else. And for that, I'd use an equivalency or benchmark. So find, this sounds weird, but calculate the impact of other tours. Look at averages of other tours. So at Equator, we have thousands of different tours pre-calculated. So we already know carbon emissions of different types of tours, over 30,000 hotels. So we have benchmarks internally that we've loaded up from essentially public data sets and combined thousands of data sets and structured and cleaned them all up so that we can assess how different types of hotels, how different countries perform when it comes to carbon, and then simplifying that down to like 1 or 2 sentences around something that makes it relatable to them, and they'll be like, oh, okay, so at least this is better than that. We walk into greenwashing very quickly when we start doing this, but as I mentioned earlier, this is inevitable, and this is where like having that government authority, the auditing entity, come in and be like, okay, we're going to check your actual data to ensure that you can market around this. Plenty of companies don't even bother calculating, they just report it. So there is a huge amount of honesty here, and again, your tourists will figure it out quickly, and it will start to be reviewed. I think within the next 5 years, you should expect to see tourists writing negative reviews about something that appears to be sustainable that isn't. So I'd throw caution to the wind on that one. Cruise ships are extraordinarily good at claiming sustainability. I think I'm not going to name the cruise liner because I'd like my company to not be sued. But one cruise liner stated very openly that they recycle 100% of their food. And this cruise liner produces 1.5 tons of waste every single day of just food. A day, one ship. And they say it's all recycled because it comes fish food. And then they just dump it in the ocean. And all I'm thinking is like Nemo is swimming up to a fishing lane where cruise liners are just like churning overhead. I mean, the noise alone would kill little Nemo. And that to me is like, it doesn't work for very long. And I think tourists will catch on quite quickly that you can't really be recycling if you're dumping it in the ocean. It's still dumping. So yeah, I don't think that'll work for long. Oh, sorry, more questions. What does my company do? When I know, I'll let you know. So originally we started out, so we are a tech startup. We began trying to build destination management software for sustainability. So identifying like concentrations of over-tourism in real time, using data to identify like crowding, how to avoid tourists, how to, go off the beaten path. And over the course of a year, I figured out that that was a really hard sell for destinations. They were built into liking consultants. So about 6 months ago, I pivoted, shut down all the work and all the models we built, and I started from scratch with my team. And now what we do is we essentially scrape huge quantities of data from around the world about impact. So from magazine articles, from public, even like purchasing certain data sets. And then we model the impacts of tourism. And then we just translate that into a single sentence, a soundbite, a bite-sized piece of information that is, I hope, super relatable and accessible. So we've been testing the platform for about 6 months. It's not public yet. Our website's not even operational. But we're already using it with clients. We already have it in operation with destinations and with tour operators and Tour Radar. And in December, it will become public. So we'll open up the platform public. So essentially, if you think about it, it's a data warehouse for like bite-sized packets of information on sustainability. Long term, my goal is to allow operators and destinations to load up their products on the platform, and we will automatically generate your impacts for you. So that's what my company's trying to do at the moment. I'll let you know if it works.
Hey, are you working with finding option actions for companies that are both win-win for the company and for the tourists?
Can I pass this to you, Milena? This feels very much in your ballpark. Win-win actions for the company and for the tourist.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Is it better? Yeah. So what we try when we work with destinations in similar formats as in Finland, we usually work with the destination, but end up collaborating quite a bit with tourism operators on the ground to help them make adjustments that then change the behavior of travelers, whether it's in a visible or invisible manner. So a lot of the effort goes on the operational level with companies. Does that answer the question?
So do you look into like operations and see where can we optimize operations that also benefit sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on what the destination strategies are. So in the case of Finland, they were focusing on carbon footprint. We work in other Nordic destinations where we are supporting transition to regenerative practices. So we are translating, okay, what does regenerative mean for the individual tourism business. And then based on that, we are helping them feed into their operations small design changes that then end up changing how consumers make choices and what they end up doing while they're there. But as I mentioned earlier, another way of using that knowledge is when governments or destinations use such behavior change techniques to steer the behavior of companies. So in some places, we see that businesses have everything in place to go plastics free, to go low carbon, and to be more sustainable in their operations, but they're not really rushing into that because they're doing well anyway. So that's when the destination can use some incentives or incorporate some proactive nudges to get businesses to make the changes that are possible now faster. So it's the same mechanism, but it's from government to company.
On that, Magnus, as well, like I think, my mic's on?
Yes.
Yeah, just on that note, the holy grail of sustainability and like the intention action gap is the ability to prove it drives conversion rates and drives sales. So the moment you can begin to definitively demonstrate that that gap can be reduced, you're looking at $1 billion, if not potentially multi-billion dollar growth for many companies and destinations. So the more you share data, the more companies are open and public about their conversion rates going up and what they're doing in sustainability, the greater the collective likelihood is of one of the big giants like Booking.com or Wyndham turning around and going, yeah, okay, we think this is seriously worth A/B testing. And we are going to, test to see if we go down this road of really demonstrating beyond the 3-leaf system. And Booking.com are one of the few big platforms that are doing anything on this. I know that Travelist organization have organized, like Google and several other organizations corporations to demonstrate it. But, TripAdvisor, as far as my company being able to tell, have nothing yet on sustainability at all. There's no information. One of the arguments is we can't audit hotels. We don't have the power or the capability to audit every hotel on our platform to see how sustainable they are, what their actual performance is. So we depend on others to audit for us. So I sympathize with their challenges, but if there is going to be massive change, it will be around sales.
But for example, in hotel business, if you could provide data that shows, gives me insights about reducing costs, that would have a sustainable impact. For example, housekeeping. Yeah. If I could, we have a sign we can put on the door, or the guest can put on the door, saying that they don't want to have housekeeping today because they want to reduce carbon footprint. But that's a big win for me as a manager. Yeah. Because now I don't have to clean the room. That reduces the cost of the room with 200 crowns. That was great for me. Yeah. And that's a win-win for both of us. And that insights would be great for me to know much more about if you have comparable data insights from all hotels in the world, like what could be a win-win for me and for the sustainability agenda.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you so much, Magnus. But that is like the goal of my company, is to make this data immediately accessible. So, you inform us that you're a hotel, and then we just generate, in Greenland or Denmark, we say, bang, here's the information that's specific to you. And we think you might be interested in these things. And other companies have done this. That's really, really incredible. I will say this as well, like the Shangri-La, the Four Seasons, they produce these reports. Very few people read them. And there's some incredible information. There's some amazing work some of the big companies are doing to reduce their footprints, to make a sustainable experience. And a lot of it gets lost in the noise. But when you go looking for it, it's genuinely impressive. So yeah, I think it's the more sharing that takes place, the more optimism I have. We have 2 minutes remaining, so I have time for maybe one more question. Unless you want to break early-ish. All good? Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
Not necessarily a suggestion, but your comment about the hotel and cleaning the overnights, your comment that you just made, hello, I don't know your name. Oh, yeah. The comment you just made me think of The Nudge, the book, The Nudge. It may be, and now it's a suggestion, but it's for you to consider, it may be best to have as a standard to clean the room every other day and ask the guests to let you know if they would like otherwise. So what you're doing is nudging them in that way, and therefore homing into what you said earlier. Make it easy. Don't create extra friction for the customer. I don't know. Those are things to be explored. I would recommend reading The Nudge if you haven't yet, because it helps you shape people's behavior through shifting the way things are positioned and the status quo. It's a very interesting book. Thank you.
Well, much of what we're talking about is based on this knowledge, but actually, the example with room cleaning is interesting because the way that it's framed when it's to save carbon, that is valid only for people who actually care about saving carbon. If you want to get the mass, you can give discount. So we have some of the businesses that we've worked with actually now price the rooms differently. So you can buy a room without cleaning, and that gives you a conscious choice, or they can give you a voucher for like a free glass of wine or something, because they are saving costs and they're splitting the cost with you as a guest. So there are ways to do that in a way that doesn't even involve carbon.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we are at time. I'm kind of informed. So thank you all so much for attending. I really appreciate your participation and engagement. And yeah, we'll be around. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone.